Tuning in to the online broadcast network, AFTERBUZZ TV. Over 20 million weekly downloads in over 150 countries, and your number one source for after-show entertainment. AFTERBUZZ TV, the destination for TV superfans. Producing aftershows for over 300 of your favorite TV shows. Interviewing celebrities and showrunners. And bringing you behind-the-scenes exclusives. All thanks to E! Entertainment's Maria Menounos, producer Kevin Undergaro, and internet leader Akamai. Now, let the buzz begin!
Welcome back, Masters of Sex fans, to another Masters of Sex after show. This is episode 2 of season 3, Three's a Crowd. I'm Will Link, and with me, as always, Adrian Snow.
Hello, everyone. Hope you're doing well tonight.
Another good episode. Another episode dealing a lot with the ideas of family, also. And actually, at the start, we had a lot of talk last week about like the kids, because there was that weird disclaimer at the end of the show, basically being like, the kids are different.
Yeah.
Michelle Ashford, she did an interview with the Hollywood Reporter this week where she vaguely said, and the quote was, due to astronomical legal hurdles, that they had to reestablish stuff about the children, and that these first 2 episodes were going to be kid heavy, but after this, it will not be as children heavy. So she wouldn't say what it was, but, there was a lot of debate about the Masters' children last week and how they might skew to reality and which ones are real and which ones aren't. And I guess it probably has something to do with the real life children don't want to necessarily be portrayed a certain way or something.
I would imagine. I mean, I know that Virginia did have 2 children, and then that Bill had 1. He didn't have the other 2.
I think Howie, the one the latest one.
Is it Johnny or Howie?
Howie's the youngest one, and I believe he's the only one that is real.
So it's, I think we did establish that last time. So it's understandable that they wouldn't want their lives represented in this show. The relationship between Bill and Virginia in real life is pretty scandalous. I would imagine they would not want to have that, kind of reflected on their real lives.
And I think it's the idea that even though Tessa isn't a real person, wasn't really one of her kids, if she does have a daughter, which she does, that she doesn't want to be, this daughter doesn't want people going around thinking, I was hitting on my my eventual stepfather there.
Or maybe they just don't want their actual life to be portrayed. Virginia is still alive.
No, she died. Did she die? In 2013.
She did die recently. Okay, so
right before the show started.
Yeah.
So.
Right. So with that said, you can kind of have a little bit more leeway with both of them since they're both passed away. But I would imagine people who are actually living and have not signed off on, allowing their lives to be portrayed, even in a fictional sense, then they can't do it. Well,
this, maybe in the future it's not going to be family kid heavy, but this episode was still had a lot of this. And what I thought was great about it, because I figured we come into this episode, there'll be a time jump, but it picked up literally right where we left off.
Yeah.
With him questioning her on the pregnancy.
And then they jumped the full 9, they did the full pregnancy in one episode.
Which I was
like, all right.
I was happy with that, because I didn't necessarily have a lot of interest in watching a pregnant Virginia throughout the season, and dealing with all that. I kind of want to get back to the sex research, which it sounds like is going to be the case.
Well, I'm curious to see if just her experiencing, just postpartum, how that experience of being a sex receptionist is how that's going to impact it.
Yeah.
Just in terms of her own sex drive, in terms of having a child, the stress of that, if they're going to play that up as well as something that, because I know her and Bill as well still, for the 9 months of pregnancy, had sex with each other. So I'm curious to see if that's going to play that up. And also just the relationship of George coming back and seemingly going to be a series regular from now on, or potentially.
Yeah, I mean, he's not in the main opening credits, his name isn't, but, he'll be around a lot, I'm sure. Or at least a specter of him over raising this new child. Because where the episode ends, I mean, not to jump too far ahead, but I guess I'm jumping way ahead to the end, the dynamic that it's also going to be about being a working mother, too, and how she deals with it. Because at the end of this episode, she really feels this idea of, I care about my work more than my child. Does that make me a terrible person? I am a terrible person. And then Bill kind of talks her down from that ledge where he says, no, your child shouldn't be around a mother who's regretful about what she's not doing, and you should inspire your child by going out and doing these things. Yeah. So,
and it's
which is true.
It is true, and it's fascinating to see them kind of have that modern day mentality, and for Bill to kind of be like, no, this is like the new way that things should be, that you should be able to see a mom who doesn't have to sacrifice everything for their child. And so I thought that was an interesting thing to have, especially coming from Bill's character, that he is so exceptional in that way in terms of his mindset that I don't think was necessarily true for the real Bill Masters. So it's kind of fascinating to see them do that. And I recall I saw last year I went to the panel for Masters of Sex, and it was interesting to watch the dynamics of Lizzy Caplan and Michael Sheen, because you get the feeling that Michael Sheen is maybe a little bit more conservative.
Oh, okay. Well, I mean, I don't know how. I mean, he does date Sarah Silverman in real life, so.
Well, I mean, just in terms of how he's talking. British. Well, yeah, I'm not going to say. I mean,
you could say
we're the Puritans, not the Brits.
That's true. That's true.
It was interesting to watch that dynamic, because the topic came up of feminism, and in terms of how the show deals with being a feminist or having feminist propaganda. I'm doing bunny ears right now for people who can't see me. And Lizzie's response to that was, I think, what did Michael said something that was along the lines of kind of belittling the term feminist, and Lizzy corrected him and said, if you believe in the equality of men and women, you are a feminist.
Yeah, because that's all it is, really, what it boils down to.
Yeah, so that's just an interesting thing to touch on, like how that plays into character.
I'm wondering, as we get further along in the series, the role that feminism is definitely going to play in this, and you'll see it coming out in the characters. But back to the beginning of this episode, we were kind of thrown a curveball, because last week we were talking about her and Bill. It must be Bill's. But but it turns out it's George's baby.
That makes sense, because
makes a lot of sense.
I forgot that Bill, no matter what happened with Libby, is still essentially infertile. Like it's not easy for him to conceive a child.
You forget, because he has 3 children at this point.
Exactly. So it was just something that I kind of forgotten about, even though we kind of commented on it last episode. So they're very smart in terms of not showing us the moment between George and Virginia last episode, and just kind of just laying it out. Right at the beginning of the episode.
It was kind of a surprise when it came out, and it was in the previously on Masters of Sex when they had a voice of, and I can't remember what character, like, oh, Bill Masters shooting blanks, like the great Bill Masters. And at that moment, I'm like, oh, wait a second. And then when she said it was George's, it all did make a lot of sense. And I like Bill's reaction to it, because you could tell there was a hint of jealousy there, and there was, he's not. Yeah, he's having an affair, but God forbid somebody have an affair that he's with, you know what I mean? And also, immediately, something we discussed last week was brought up, abortion.
Yes.
Which I wasn't sure if they would go that route.
Well, I looked it up, it's still illegal. If the year that the book was published was 1966. Yeah. So even if this was... even if it was conceived in 1965, abortion didn't become legal till 1973. Yeah. So the whole idea that she had already made the appointment and was going to go through with it, that in and of itself was incredibly illegal. And if that had come out before the book had come out, she would have been shamed then. And, you know, to have the baby, she would be shamed. It's just a lot of shame.
She couldn't win.
She wasn't going to win.
And she knew this last week. She was talking about, like, basically, as a woman, she's going to have, when she talks about Darwin, how Darwin was,
Yes.
she's like, well, I'm going to have it worse. Because, yeah, in this episode, she's presented with no way to win and look good in this, except to where we get to eventually marrying George, which isn't a good idea either.
No, not at all. And it was fascinating to see, I guess, for George to take on that kind of what people consider to be feminine mindset of, but we could fall in love again, but we could try again. And usually you don't, on television and in, you know, just in media, you don't ever see that portrayed coming from a man like, well, if I'm going to marry you, I really want to marry you. I really want this to be for love, not for convenience or because you're knocked up. So it was nice to see that kind of mindset from him, but also that was countered by Libby's mindset, which was so archaic in terms of you were going to ruin everything. You're going to ruin my reputation. So it's kind of like that return to the old Libby with that.
Well, Libby, but I mean, do you blame her in a way? Because she already has, she's trying to make like she's fine with this whole thing. I read that as equally like her dealing with the issues, knowing her husband is in this relationship with another woman beyond just, I mean, there is a lot of self-preservation going there, and it's not supportive at all, but at the same time, I kind of see where she's coming from.
I understand it, just especially being in that time, and for me, I have to kind of be able to step out of myself, being someone born after that time, living in present time. But with that said, I think Libby was kind of doing some interesting things last season in terms of moving forward, in terms of opening up her mindset.
Yeah.
And we talked about this a little last week too, where it's like there's the world that you inhabit and the cultures that, you know, you express without even realizing it, and the things that you believe and hope for. Do you get what I mean by that? So I understand like her hesitancy about Virginia appearing as an unmarried, unwed, or an unmarried and pregnant woman alongside her husband. But with that said, Libby should have divorced Bill like 10 years ago.
That's really what it is. The fact of the matter is they shouldn't be together
They shouldn't be together. And I think it really has to come down to Libby making that choice. I mean, outside of what happened in real life in terms of their divorce. In the show, Libby needs to make the choice to leave Bill.
Now, we mentioned George, and you mentioned George taking what would be considered maybe the feminine role in this and what he wants. But do you think George really is in love with her still, or he's been down so many paths, he's just trying to hold on to something he thinks is good from the past, like trying to just...
I've always felt that George really loved Virginia.
Okay.
Even in the first season where he was, you know, they were still kind of hooking up on occasion, and were they still married?
No, they weren't married.
But yeah, so they still had that kind of, or he's always had that desire for her and that passion for her, and he really enjoys having sex with her.
Yeah.
And maybe he's confusing that with love, but because he did bring that up about like how the sex was so great, how could it not be love? Yeah. Which is something that I feel like people say just when they have had really good sex.
Well, you know, but that's true. That's true. We've all been there.
Yeah. So, and sometimes it has absolutely nothing to do with love. But go ahead.
But that's something that's also kind of addressed throughout this episode, too, and it was addressed a little bit before. I mean, it's unfortunately addressed. It always starts off with the idea of promiscuity, as if that's something terrible. But, you know, they talk about like passion and things like this and these other things you get from sex that aren't necessarily procreation or love or these things. And Bill's quick to bring those up a lot. And it happens in this episode.
Yeah, when he's talking to Harry Vetters and he mentions the mental promiscuity versus physical promiscuity. I was like, oh, that's interesting. He should not be saying that to that journalist. But that's an interesting thought to have of how it's more dangerous to as Jimmy Carter said, lust.
Oh, yeah.
What would he have lusted?
He had lust in his heart.
Yes. And that's a more dangerous thing than to go out and give as good as it gets to 3 men.
Yeah, if a woman services 3 men, like just everything about that scene is so uncomfortable because
Horrible.
he's not the people person.
Yeah, he's not. And he doesn't know how
Virginia's
to
the
phrase
people
that.
person. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, Virginia does not obviously get the abortion.
Yeah.
And that she went to that scene, and I actually thought, well, I mean, she's there in the middle of it, so I thought she was going to go
Yeah.
through with it, even after the time jump, and I thought we were going to deal with how she felt about that, or how that, you know, but no, when we cut back, like you said, it's another time jump, and she's a little more pregnant to the
Yeah.
point where, though they haven't announced it to anybody, but everybody knows.
I can kind of tell.
And the other thing that's interesting is that they have taken on a new client. They've taken on the Shah of Iran.
Yes.
And his wife. They're trying to get pregnant.
Yeah.
And they're having similar issues that it seemingly at first similar issues that Bill was having. And I didn't catch her name. I don't even know if they
Princess.
ever is. Yeah.
Yeah, the princess.
But she doesn't. I like the idea of the importance of. Well, I mean, we have to have a baby because there needs to be an heir to Iran. Although that wouldn't have worked out anyway. But there, you know, so I thought that was interesting, and that she immediately knows Virginia's. She could tell. She immediately calls it out, and Bill is completely does not know how to handle this, particularly with the idea of telling Libby.
Yeah.
And I thought that was another great scene that was done to comic effect too, where he's trying to fix the television until he's trying to be distracted. He's talking about egg salad. Oh, I thought she was just sick from egg salad. I should know. And Libby is just shooting him daggers, and I thought that was a great little moment
Yeah.
in the episode.
It was a nice dynamic to see them kind of have that brief kind of family husband and wife moment of Bill fixing the TV and trying to not talk about how his lover is knocked out by another man
Yeah.
with his wife.
Yeah, because it's so the dynamics of it, because I mean, you would normally think, oh, she must be jealous because she
Yeah.
knows, but no, she knows Bill can't do this. And yeah, it is all about perception with Lizzy. It's all about the assumption that the rest of the world will think that Bill knocked up Virginia.
Yeah.
You know, and that's where
She's
where
not
I'm saying-
wrong to have that. I did kind of want to see her take the abortion route, because that's not something that's discussed often in television or film. Just the after effects of a woman going through an abortion, and in terms of how it might affect her physically or mentally, how
Yeah.
it might not affect her physically or mentally. So I was kind of disappointed when she decided to keep the baby, just knowing, you know, the real life Virginia Johnson did not have a third child with George Johnson. But with that said, it does, I guess, make for interesting storytelling in that way, in terms of how that's going to affect George and her's relationship.
Well, again, it sounds like all this has also been done, and I mean, you always hate when shows do this, but this is behind the scenes on every show, done for like almost a legal purpose of where they want to show, oh, we want to give her real child that she had in life, and these other 2 kids were made up. Like,
Yeah.
so, I mean, but I agree with you. I mean, not that wherever, I was excited for the abortion storyline, but it would have been interesting to have seen how they
Yeah.
handled it, because this is a show that deals with sex in a very frank way,
Yeah.
and also in the consequences of certain things, and it would have been very interesting to see that route. But you know, maybe
Yeah.
they'll explore that with another character. Maybe it is something, because as we get closer through the years to like Roe v. Wade and stuff like that, and deeper into sexual revolution, I got to imagine these topics are going to come up again.
Well, I would hope so. I think something that they kind of gloss over in the show is female sexual. I can't think of the word. Male sexual. What is it? Impotency.
Oh, impotence?
Female.
Oh, okay. Yes,
impotence.
yes.
They kind of touched on it with Lester's wife.
Yeah.
But they didn't really go all the way with it. Like, you hear so much about male impotence on the show. You hear so much about Bill's, and then Lester's, and then the fear of the Shah, and the fact that he has a low sperm count. And then they just, with the princess, in terms of that storyline when it's discovered that she is also infertile.
Yes.
Did she kill herself? What happened?
No,
she just died.
No, he
but
did
she
not.
died.
No, she didn't die.
He was saying, "I'm mourning the princess." At the end of the episode, Bill
No,
turns
but
and looks at the television.
I thought it was that they broke up. I thought that was that they were no longer together.
I thought she died.
I thought they
because it looked like he was mourning her.
I think he was just mourning the loss of this woman because he clearly, the Shah clearly loved her.
Yeah.
But he needs to do what he needs to do as a king and a leader of Iran. He needs to make sure he has an heir, and she has that.
But that's the thing, is that what she was discussing with Bill was that she could not stand by and watch him conceive a child, and that he could marry more than one woman, but she could not stand by and do that.
I took that as she left him because of this, but you're taking it that she killed herself.
Think it would be so easy for her to just get up and leave.
But if he really loved her, which it seemed like he did, he would let her leave. He's the Shah.
That's not how I think that would work.
I think. Well, I mean, also you gotta. I mean, what's weird about Iran, and now we're talking about the nation of Iran, but it was oddly more progressive, and it reverted after the revolution in like '78 or whatever. So when the Shah was overthrown. So I buy that he would.
I'm not saying that he wouldn't. It just seemed
You're saying
odd
there's
that he
still
would have a
mechanics.
press conference. Yeah, there's still mechanics.
It also seems
Divorce
odd that it
is
would
frowned
be.
upon.
It also seems odd that that press conference would be airing in a hospital in St. Louis.
Yeah,
but
so it seemed like she had died. Whether or not that was by suicide, whether or not she was murdered, it seemed like she had died just because he felt the need to have a press conference. Like Prince Charles didn't have a press conference. When Princess Di did, because he cheated on her. But
but I also think that, I mean, look, that's well, I mean, how much power does Prince Charles? This is the person who was actually leading a nation, so I think it's more news.
Yeah, but I'm saying even in that time, in the 1960s, I don't think that he would have a press conference about his wife leaving him. Like, I think it would be, if that were to happen, that they would try to hide that as much as possible. I could see him having a press conference if she died, but I wouldn't see it, especially how sad he looked in the press conference. Not just like she was gone and divorced him, but like heartbroken.
Look, I could totally buy that the pain that she felt was so great that she wouldn't even want to live, and she didn't see a way out. I mean, this is the man who loved her. This man seemed to be her entire life.
Yeah.
We'll have to look it up, I guess.
Yeah,
this is one thing I didn't get a chance to.
That she was dead.
But she did have a great scene. Admittedly, I thought some of the parallels they were trying to make of marriages of convenience and things like that. The idea that the Shah's next marriage would be a marriage of convenience, just to have a child, and going on with Virginia's marriage of convenience, George. It was a bit heavy-handed, but I thought she did have a wonderful scene with Bill where they were talking about the importance of a partner being someone's other half, and she felt like you couldn't have that without having a child with him, like that having a child was part of that. And she did say she will no longer be loved completely because once he has a child with somebody else, he can never love her as much as, I thought that was a nice scene, though.
That was an interesting thought of just that the child will always win out, and kind of how that played up against Bill's, thoughts about Virginia having a child with George, and how George will essentially always win because he has a child with Virginia. And to think that I don't necessarily believe that Bill feels the same way in terms of Libby.
No.
Like, Libby does not win out just because they have children.
Well, when Bill said the line that a partner is truly your other half, I mean, he's talking about Virginia in that case. And that's the bond that's important to him. Unfortunately, not his children. It's his book. And there are a lot of allusions at the end of the book is their child together, And, I also love the way Bill handled George in this episode. Like, I was struggling to think how many, if any, scenes we've had between Bill and George in this series. Because in that scene, Bill had a way of really cutting him down. He mentions his bar tab. He's taunting with like, I'll give you this large check, just do this marriage of convenience. And I actually thought it was a really good scene. And I can't remember the two of them having a scene together. They might have.
Maybe one, I think, when Virginia wanted custody, and then the beginning when they first started the research together. I think they had a run-in at Virginia's house.
I think you're right.
Yeah, I thought it was really interesting how Bill was kind of emasculating George.
Yeah.
And guilting him. It was just fascinating to watch because it was such the reverse of what you see done to a man. Like, you see that a lot with women. You see like we can fund you, we can protect you, we can do this, or you can have the money, and we'll give you the money to do this. Usually in terms of like, get an abortion, we'll give you the money.
Yeah. Under the table.
Under the table. So to see him kind of being just so much shame. There's just so much shame this episode in terms of you aren't man enough to take care of yourself. You can't take care of the child. You can't take care of Virginia. So this is what we can do for you. You can just get married and have the money, and it has nothing to do with love.
But he can also do the one thing Bill can't with Virginia, which is get her pregnant.
Yeah.
But yet that doesn't seem... I mean, it has to on some level be important to Bill. Like you said at the beginning, that did seem a little bit of jealousy and stuff, even though he doesn't like kids.
Well, Libby commented on that as well. Like that was the one thing that he cannot share with Virginia as a child, and being able to get her pregnant, and that he wants to be able to share everything with Virginia, but he can't do that. So how is he going to feel, in terms of her having this thing that she shares with George? So yeah, it'll be interesting to see how that eventually plays out.
The other thing that really hit home the idea of their partnership in the other half thing was when Maggie Grace comes in, Dr.
Wesh,
comes in, and that idea, I was offended by Bill's suggestion of, it's if, we'll just get this other woman to come in on the book tour, or like to talk about things, or not talk about things even more. That he wanted this, he felt he needed this other woman here, and it's like, was she going to be standing there taking credit for Virginia's work? I don't really understand the role she was supposed to play.
Well, I think he kind of said it. He said, I need a woman by my side so that people do not think I'm a pervert.
Yeah.
And this kind of also goes back and forth with how forward-thinking Bill can be, but then also how backward-thinking Bill can be. So even when he goes into the exam room with the princess, and she tries to say, well, it could be endometriosis. That's really difficult for me to say. And he snaps at her because he just wants her to be there to stand and make people feel comfortable.
Yeah.
But he doesn't actually want her to serve any purpose. Which
is also totally horrible for her.
Yeah.
Because she clearly has the credentials to be able to diagnose things, and she's a doctor.
And she has, she did say, I did research the book. I am able to speak on the topics if you want me to. And it must be, I would assume it would be incredibly heartbreaking to sit there and have him say, no, you're just here to, look pretty.
Services 3 men scene in the interview. Yeah, which again there was a lot of befuddled Bill in this episode, between the thing with the where he's telling her while fixing the TV, in the interview. But I like that. I like when he's thrown off a little bit. To even at the end when she's going into labor and he's singing Danny Boy. Yeah. And it's really
so weird.
I didn't know I could sing.
Right? It's like, okay, you just wanted Michael Sheen to sing a song.
Yeah.
But no, it was nice to see him just kind of knocked off kilter a little bit, to kind of be that he really does need Virginia.
Yes.
That he can't really do things without Virginia. And it was also kind of sad in that moment where you realize that Virginia called Bill before she called George. And when George comes into the hospital, Bill wants to speak to him. But then he has that realization that he shouldn't even be there.
Yeah.
And that he's been there far longer than George has. And so he just quietly leaves. It was interesting because it was kind of like, you are out of place, that you're not supposed to be there in that moment.
It's also the opposite of in last week's episode where she was mad that he's insinuated himself into her life.
Yeah.
Now he's the first person she calls, because they really are the best partners for each other.
Yeah.
They're the only ones who could probably stand being with each other in a lot of ways when you think about it.
But George did have a good point when he was talking to Virginia after their wedding. And he said, you've changed. You're not a romantic anymore. You're not as passionate as you used to be. Because I kind of mentioned that last episode, where Virginia used to just be a very passionate sexual woman.
Yes.
And now it seems like sex for her has become clinical. Like, she has become clinical in how she deals with her life, her children. Everything is about the work, and that has affected every other aspect of her life.
Spending 10 years working with Bill Masters, I guess.
Yeah.
And sleeping with him for most of those is going to do that to you.
She would rub off on Bill, but that's it.
But I think that also goes towards, she's so driven by the book in her career, the fears that she has. She's worried that she's too career driven, and probably, I guess, throwing yourself into all that has changed her as well.
Yeah.
Libby is very excited, though, about the marriage of Virginia and George, because she feels betrayed by Virginia, and that is the one thing that's not fair. That Libby, we were talking before about how Libby, how fair is it how she feels or how she's treating her. That is the one thing, though, that isn't fair, because this isn't a betrayal that Virginia's made against Libby, but she does kind of feel that. But with the marriage to George, she's really encouraging, oh, you should give it a shot, and we should have she's trying to turn it into a bigger thing. Oh, we take pictures, and then the children will know when you got married again, and all this stuff, which clearly it doesn't call for all this pomp and circumstance.
Well, I think Libby still has a lot of hope for her and Bill in some odd way. That that Bill will suddenly turn into this man that she, I guess, has always wished that he would become.
Yeah.
And that's just not the case. It's and what's funny, in their real life, Bill Masters was very much the clinical man. He was not a loving man. And the one woman he really ever truly loved, he left Virginia Johnson for and married her in his 80s. Yeah. So obviously Libby and Virginia are just not the women to get him to have that type of passion.
Yeah, or it's that he is still sometimes walking that line between being open about sex yet stuffy about it. Yeah. That maybe it just took him that long in life to finally, buy into his way of thinking or his.
Well, have you read the Masters of Sex book?
No, I have not. Have you?
Mm-hmm. I'm halfway through it. I haven't finished it, but they do discuss his long lost love for this woman that he eventually marries, in 1993. Was it Gabrielle? It starts with a G, but how he had been in love with this girl who was a sister of a friend since high school. And and he was a pilot, and he picked her up or something from home, and he was about to confess his love to her, and he realized that he was flying her to get married to someone else. And so he never confessed, and she married someone else. And then when she got divorced or her husband died, he reached out to her again and left Virginia for this woman.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's pretty crazy.
So it wasn't there's just this woman that he met once long ago. He had undying love for this woman his whole life.
And just never did anything.
Never did anything about it.
And had he done that back then, well, then we might not also
we may
have
not know
this
about
book.
the human sexual response.
Yeah, exactly. We'd still be totally clueless.
We'd all be sitting here being I have no idea how my vagina or penis works.
So it's a good thing that he did not confess his love to that woman.
It's a good thing that Bill Masters spent majority of his life sad and lovelorn over this woman.
He suffered for the rest of us.
Oh no.
But from a filmmaking point of view, I really enjoyed that the marriage vows were cross-cut with the prenup agreement, and it made for, I think, the coldest wedding in television history. And I love the look on George's face the whole time, and then when it's Kiss the Bride, how he kisses her on the cheek.
Yeah, and she looks at Bill.
Yeah. And it's such a sham, and everyone knows it. And then you see them out on like the book tour kind of thing. They're like giving speeches and stuff, and George is drinking heavily because, of course, you're gonna drink heavily. How do you? I mean, I feel for George in this episode. Whether I think his love is misplaced or not, I really feel bad for him because he's a prop. That's all he is at this point. He's a prop to serve the Masters and Johnson burgeoning empire now.
He's a trophy husband.
Yeah.
Yeah.
He's out there on the tour where they really play up the spouses. They can't do it without him.
And that's really sad. It's such a reflection of that time. I mean, it still happens. You hear about women in New York who are married to men and they are on allowances and they have have you heard about this? Like the women of Upper East Side, where it's just insane, like how things work and bonuses for what? For what? Like, what did you have to do to get that bonus?
I know what they're doing for those bonuses.
But just that whole idea that you cannot, and we still do it to this day, of you cannot have this. You cannot have a child, or you cannot have this type of life without the appearance or the illusion of being happily married or having an illusion of being in a good family. Especially for women, it can be really traumatic if you decide to have a child unwed. It can, you know, I know in my personal family there are people who probably had children. Got married for bad reasons, but. So it was kind of, I do like the twist that this was all happening to George. I like George. I don't think anything's wrong with him, but I like that it was like, well, you're the trophy husband. You have to be the one who gets drunk at the parties.
Do you think there's any chance at a certain point this season they give it a go? Virginia gives in and tries to give it an actual go because he's going to be around and he's going to be they're going to be raising a kid together, which is a powerful bonding experience.
I think it really depends on whether or not George becomes bitter. If he becomes bitter, then he will not win with Virginia. So if he becomes like a drunk and bitter about the setup of the marriage, then no, that's never going to happen. I always say, like, the easiest way to get someone to fall in love with you is to be nice to them. Like, so if he wants there to be a chance, then he should just be the best version of George he can be. And maybe through that, potentially, possibly, you never know, Virginia might come around to that. But knowing how things played out in real life, I get the feeling he's just going to become a bitter old drunk and they're going to get divorced. Yeah. That's
Poor
just life,
George.
you know?
That's what happened. The other good cross-cutting, of course, the last shot of she's looking at the baby that she has with George through the window, and Bill is looking at him and Virginia's baby, the book, through the window of the bookstore. The book's out there now. You know, they're getting famous clients now. They're getting people flying all the way from Iran with it. I'm assuming we're going to deal. And we talked about this a little bit last week. I'm very curious to see how they handle the level of celebrity that they might have to deal with in the aftermath of this. That'll
be interesting to see. It'll also be interesting to see how Virginia juggles being a mom and having this newfound celebrity. You know, a lot of the times when a woman has a career and is also a new mother, there's the expectation that being a mother has to come first. So the career must stop so she can raise a child. And I'm curious to see if they're going to have her kind of do a balancing act. I'm curious to see if they're going to make her resentful of the child, if George is going to have like a Mr. Mom type of persona going on, or how they're going to play around with that, or if they're just going to make the children disappear.
I have a feeling the children are going to, based off that interview I read in the Hollywood Reporter, I have a feeling the children are going to kind of disappear into the background, or at least the level of background that they've always been on the series.
Yeah.
Like, even in the first season, her kids were there, but they were never, like, there weren't necessarily prominent stories about them. Like, they've already, like, in this first episode, and even in this episode, you see Tessa's still behavior, and so you want to go to the Bob Dylan concert.
And that's also because I think babies are kind of a pain in the butt to deal with. In television, just in movies and television. The concept of having people have babies is just frustrating to watch and probably to deal with on set.
I don't. So. Yeah, I don't. I had a friend who who worked on a show, and his character had a child, and he had no issue with it. He hated having to hold the kid. So you have to be it's someone else's kid, and like he had to start he would wear a watch. But he had to stop wearing the watch because he was afraid to get caught on the kid. Like all these things. I mean, not that that's the reason why you shouldn't have a show about a kid, but I mean, on set, it's a pain in the butt.
Most people don't want to deal with it. I mean, on soap operas, they age them like a month later. It's like, all of a sudden they're like 3 years old, and I just had this child. So, I can understand them kind of putting that to the wayside, but it would be nice to have them have that commentary, especially during that time of a woman being a working mom. So we'll see if they go in that direction.
One last thing I want to bring up about the episode. Mm-hmm. We haven't gotten enough Betty this season.
Right?
We need more Betty. She's only been in like 2 scenes. Looking great, by the way. I like the 60s look. I like the tie she's wearing. I like the bob. Yeah, looking good. I'm excited for her to become, because it sounds like they talk about her being more integral into the office. Yeah. So I want to see that in practice.
Well, it was nice to get back to the office and to see Lester and Betty, even if it was briefly. Betty had such a strong storyline the first 2 seasons, so I'm understanding of the fact that she's kind of not that big in the beginning of this season.
Unless I heard wrong, I believe Sarah Silverman's character is coming back this season.
Oh, really?
So that would affect Betty's storyline. That's what I read that somewhere.
I mildly grimaced. Not because I don't like Sarah Silverman, just because I didn't really like the character and I thought she was irrelevant. But
well, maybe we'll see what happens.
I mean, that would be interesting for them to touch on. They have a lot of things they're juggling in the air. They're juggling, feminist issues. They're juggling LGBT issues if they bring back Sarah Silverman's character. So I think that would be interesting for them to touch on, especially knowing the real life Bill Masters' point of view on homosexuality. However, I didn't really like that character.
It didn't really. It kind of just went to the inevitable conclusion of where that storyline last season was going to go. Yeah. So maybe I don't know. Maybe they could open it up in a new way. Maybe. I mean, it is the sexual revolution.
But it's at the very beginning of the sexual revolution. I always feel like the sexual revolution really began in the 70s. It was like 60s, gotta get through civil rights. Gotta get through this.
One thing at a time.
Still gotta get through it. Yeah. Still working on it. Still working on the sexual revolution. 40 years later.
Well, that's the other thing. Amazing thing when you watch a show like this or a show like Mad Men or something that takes place in the 60s, and it's like, oh, we're dealing with these exact same things.
Yes,
I didn't think this was an issue anymore.
Nothing has changed. So some things have changed, but...
One other thing I'd like to bring up is... I'm not necessarily related to the episode, but related to Masters of Sex. A little, I guess, news this week.
AFTERBUZZ TV News.
Oh.
Well, it was the Emmy nominations.
Yes.
And, of course, our 2 leads were snubbed, Michael Sheen and Lizzy Caplan. But both Beau Bridges and Allison Janney were nominated for the Guest Actor Emmys for their roles on the series last season.
And Beau wasn't really... on last season.
No, I feel like he was only in 2 episodes. He had a really great speech.
He had a pretty crazy arc, but...
Yeah. Barton had a really great speech at the end of season 2 that he gave Bill, which I assume is why he got nominated.
Well, season 2 was also the year that... Was that when he attempted suicide, or was that all in season 1?
I was struggling to remember whether that was the premiere of season 2 or the finale of season 1.
I think season 2 is when the first 2 episodes were about him attempting suicide. And also the end of that affair that Allison Janney's character was having with...
Yeah, I think that wrapped up. The seasons are kind of blending to me.
Yeah, they blend a little bit.
But Allison Janney won this award last season at the Emmys for her season 1 storyline, which I thought was some of my favorite work I've seen Allison Janney ever do. And that's saying something, because she's always so brilliant. But that season 1 story was she was starting to finally, for the first time, become a sexual being and stuff like that. I found it like beautiful and heartbreaking, and I loved it, and I was so glad she won last season. I know Lizzy Caplan was nominated last year, didn't get it this year. Michael Sheen is never nominated for anything, which is upsetting.
You're right.
He's never been nominated for an Emmy.
Wasn't he nominated for Frost versus Nixon?
No.
He was nominated for an Oscar?
He was not. No, Frank Langella was. And also same thing with the Queen. When he played Tony Blair, I remember walking out of the Queen. Helen Mirren's amazing, but I said, Michael Sheen, I hope he gets a supporting actor nomination. He didn't get one for that either. He's always like the less showy character in a lot of those movies. Like the Queen is so showy, and then Tony Blair wasn't. Frost wasn't as showy as Nixon.
Yeah.
So I feel like he should have been nominated for that. He was brilliant in Frost Nixon. He was brilliant in the Queen. And he's brilliant on Masters of Sex.
Oh, that's a bummer. He
feel
was
like
really great in Tron too.
He's
Michael Sheen. Awesome in Tron.
Michael Sheen's always great.
And even those Twilight sequels.
Yeah, I mean, he's like kind of hamming it up, and it's great.
He's fun with his career.
So Michael Sheen deserves a nomination for something at some point.
Yes, but with that said,
predictions.
Yes.
And now, your AfterBuzz TV predictions.
So, any thoughts for?
Well, I feel like we've touched on a lot of the, predictions of what could possibly happen. I would like to hope they really touch on just like her being a working mother, but I think they're really going to drop that and deal more with like in terms of her sexuality after the pregnancy.
Yeah.
I think they're going to go in that direction instead of that, and also how the dynamic of her and George's relationship affects the dynamic of her and Bill's relationship.
Well, there's so much, it's funny, the sex after the pregnancy stuff. I could already see Bill like, well, no, we have to find out things about how a woman, right after how soon she feels sick. I could already see the research being done in his head.
Oh, yeah.
They mentioned it enough, the idea of being afraid of the press and the press finding out certain things or thinking certain things, that I got to imagine at some point soon, somebody in the press, and I know we talked about this a little last week, it's not like the days of TMZ, but they mentioned it enough in this episode, I feel like somebody's going to find out something at some point, and they're either going to have to try to convince them to bury it, or they're going to have to deal with it head on, be it whether they find out her marriage to George is kind of a sham, because there is that lengthy prenup out there that I feel like somebody can dig up, where it even basically says like they're not gonna, they can be with other people and stuff like that. So I feel like that's gonna come into play some way with their dealings with the press.
They might play on that. I think if that does come up, they might push it back for season 4, because I think they might finally have Virginia and Bill get married by season 4.
Yeah.
So I don't know if they're going to do it as quickly.
I can't imagine Bill and Libby being together by the end of the season, though. I mean, it seems to be on the trajectory of...
Well, if this is 1966, in real life, they were married by 1971.
Like 71, yeah, so...
And they've already jumped a year in
Who
2
knows?
episodes.
But they also do play a little fast and loose with some facts.
Yes,
so
they
you
do.
never know what they're going to do.
So we'll see.
It'll be fun.
Oh, yeah.
Tell the people where they can find you.
You can find me on Instagram and Twitter at Miss Adrian Snow. That's MSADRIANSNOW.
And you can find me on Twitter at The Real Will Link. You can also listen to my pop culture comedy podcast, Will Sean Podcast, on iTunes. Find that. It's fun. You'll like it. Trust me. Until then, thank you so much for watching us and listening to us. We will see you next week.
From executive producers Maria Menounos, Kevin Undergaro, Phil Svitek, and the entire AfterBuzz TV staff, we would like to thank you for listening to the AfterBuzz TV network. To watch or listen to other after shows and post comments or questions, be sure to visit AfterBuzzTV.com. I'm Sir Richard Wentworth, and this has been a presentation of AfterBuzz TV.
Buzz you later.
The views expressed herein are those of the hosts only and do not necessarily reflect the views of AfterBuzz TV or its owners or principals.